Hi, everyone, and welcome to another instalment of the chats that we're having with incredible people and organisations doing work out in the community for animals, rescuing and caring for them and advocating for them as well. So my fifth interview is with Tamsyn from Fly By Night. Fly By Night is an entirely volunteer-run wildlife shelter in Melbourne dedicated to the rescue and rehabilitation of the threatened grey-headed flying fox, as well as other native bats and wildlife. Tamsyn, welcome, and thanks so much for chatting with me today. And how have you been going through this, what is a really challenging time for everybody, not just for those amazing, beautiful sky puppies?
Oh, thanks, Andy, for having me. It's really good to sort of bring up the bats. They often get a very bad rap. They're not the diseased, dirty, full of diseases type animals, and they don't fly into your hair. So that's a misconception that most people have, that they are out to fly into our hair, which is definitely they want to get as far away from people as possible. So it has been quite a challenge. We have noticed, whilst people have been at home, it's good that they're calling, but we have noticed there's been quite an influx of rescues being called in, which is quite depressing because it actually highlights that a lot more animals are actually getting caught in netting and not being reported. So that's one of the things I suppose we'll talk about shortly. Yeah.
Okay, great. That's wonderful to hear. And I suppose in many ways, Hollywood, I guess, is responsible for a lot of the bad rap that bats get, because whilst horror movies and vampire movies in particular are a great form of entertainment, they really have been part of a cultural thinking, if you like, of promoting this misnomer that bats are somehow evil and that they do bad things, and that, so, if you leave your mosquito netting off in the middle of the night, a bat's going to come in and you're going to find yourself having your throat ripped out and all these sorts of things. It's been a really bad rap that they've had over the years, and certainly COVID hasn't helped that. But I want to return, if I can, to some historical events to give some context to what we're talking about for everyone who's listening. So in early 2014, the bats of Melbourne suffered terribly. We had a week of sweltering temperatures all over 40 degrees, and that killed thousands of these precious animals. Now, I know that you and many others couldn't just stand by and let that happen, and this is what led to you establishing Fly By Night. Can you share the story of how that all began with our listeners?
Yeah, so I was rescuing, and I'd done two young grey-headed flying foxes, hand-raised them. I've done a number of rescues, but nothing prepares you for a heat event. It's really, really quite traumatizing. It affects you every year that I've done it. It's really seeing the amount of death. You just have clumps and clumps of dead animals. And what we, that particular year, we had 100 pups come in, which is something we hadn't really dealt with here in Victoria before, with having so many young, and we needed to have a sort of a second sort of flight aviary. So I'd always loved the creatures of flying foxes. I'd worked sort of more with the in Queensland, actually up north. We moved up there for a short period of time, and I did some of the scrub pythons and sort of more of the unusual creatures. But coming down here, there was that real need for more bat carers. And what's with Caesar, he was one of those. He was premature. Most people had said he won't make it. So that particular day, it was about 10:30 at night. We'd had it was over 40 degrees. We were all really exhausted, but we are aware there's still quite a number of live young under the bodies of adult bats. So there was two volunteers, Greg and Louise, were out there, unfortunately going through the horrible task of going through dead animals. And little Caesar, who was smaller than the palm of your hand, was picked up, no fur, no anything, and we all thought, oh, he was dead. And someone says, is that a microbat? What's that doing in there? And it was most likely his mother had given birth while she was struggling with the heat. And he was such a beautiful animal. He really it took a lot of carers and rescuers really loved him, just seeing that he thrived. He really did thrive, and that's pretty much since then. I already loved animals, but particularly him, it really got the ball rolling, as they say.
Yeah, wonderful. And it's, look, I think it's important for people to know too, because I love the fact that you've been working over the years with the different animals, the ones that most people would not really perhaps think of, for different reasons. I mean, I know that there's people out there who love snakes and things like that, but it's another step altogether to work with snakes that are native to Australia, because there are a number of them that are quite venomous, and it requires people who are highly trained and to work in that area. And I wanted to touch on too the fact that the public, the general public, need to understand as well that where bats are concerned, they can't grab them and rescue them themselves. It's actually quite precarious. Yes. They need to have inoculations. Can you just give us a little bit of a hint about that?
Yeah, so with flying foxes, or any bat, so the big bats or the little bats, so you get little ones that they eat insects, and then you get the flying foxes that are the pollen and nectar eaters. What we just tell people is if they see one in distress, just don't touch it. There's no risk if they don't touch it. You can't get anything from urine or feces or all this misconceptions. It's there's a slight, it is a risk, but is a slight risk of when you're bitten or scratched, that if that particular bat is infected with ABLV, which is Australian bat lyssavirus, that it can be passed on to us. So it's always important that people go straight to the emergency department if they are bitten or scratched, and that's something we see commonly in fruit tree netting. People often try to let the animal out and let it go, and they are unfortunately bitten in the meantime. But you do get the people that are worried about them getting hurt when on the road or things like that, and you just don't touch it. Call a wildlife rescue group.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to make, that people need to understand, like, the best intentions are there, obviously, and they feel compassion for these animals and they want to release them. But they need to understand that they are a wild animal and that there are risks involved, and that trained people are the people that you should call. And it's just something that I think that people should really understand about all. You wouldn't jump into a paddock and try and rescue a great, giant eastern grey kangaroo that's hopping around in pain. Because you're quite likely to end up on the wrong side of a hospital bed with that. And the same goes.
Sorry, yeah. I wouldn't go near a koala. I was driving down the Great Ocean Road, and there was a koala in the middle of the road, and I was talking to the rescuer, and she's like, "Oh, just throw a blanket over it," and it just growled at me, and I was like, and I was doing flying foxes at this point, and I'm like, "Sure." And I was like, "No way!" I called her back. There's no way I can pick that animal up. I was, they're quite scary. Whereas with flying foxes or any wildlife, look, they're going to bite you if they're scared and trapped. And most of the instances where things like that can happen is when we're getting into their space. So as long as you're not touching them or trapping them in a situation where they can't get away, that's where things can happen, unfortunately.
Exactly. And look, and bats and flying foxes are such incredible creatures, but most people still know so very little about them. There's not a great deal of information out in the community about them, and their real only contact with them is seeing those silent silhouettes in the evening sky, which is a beautiful sight in and on its own. Can you please share with our listeners how incredible bats are, and not just that, but the critical role they actually play in our ecosystem?
Yeah, well, grey-headed flying foxes, or any flying foxes are pollinators. They can fly upwards of 30 k's a night, pollinating our. They cross pollinate our eucalypts. So a lot of our hardwood forests are generated by flying foxes. There's a lot of people that say, they're not from Melbourne, they're not from South Australia. Well, that's actually incorrect. They have always travelled. They just have never stayed. So they're constantly moving all the way up the East Coast pollinating. So they might, people will say, I don't want those bats here. Can we move them? Well, no, you have to move the entire population of flying foxes because they're not the same bats. So their importance is so high that, we have that saying for koalas, no tree, no me, where you can kind of flip that around for flying foxes and say, if there's no me, no flying fox, there's no trees, so you're not going to have koalas. So that's they're just, if not more, not to upset any koala people, but yeah, they're quite important animals, very intelligent, can be very trusting within a few days of having them in care. Most people don't understand just how highly intelligent they are. They the pollinating, especially for flying foxes. Then you've got your microbats that do your insect eaters, and they help with that kind of aspect as well in terms of disease. With mosquitoes and things like that. So there's huge range of things that bats do. Yes.
I think that's a really important point, because I think the broader community very readily sees and recognises that bees and some species of birds have a crucial role in pollination. And that they travel, and that's part of that. And I think there needs to be a fundamental shift in consciousness of the community that flying foxes and bats are part of that same system. They're travelling pollinators, and that they have to look at this holistically rather than as single species doing this and another one doing that. That propagation and cross-pollination are out there for a reason, and all of these species are contributing. So when you if you demonise bats and flying foxes, and if you try to remove them from that system, that you're going to have a detrimental effect further down the line that will affect other species like koalas, like other native species, because that propagation won't happen.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, it's and some countries that have lost their bats or bees and as such, they actually have people. They employ people to go out with little pots and self-pollinate each little thing, and that's not something you can see us doing with eucalypts. But yeah, it's definitely something that most people aren't aware of. They think flying foxes, they immediately think fruit bat. They ravage orchards. They don't realise it's actually native fruit, like your Moreton Bay fig. Lily pilly, those type of fruits. If you clear a heap of native gum and put orchards up, well, of course they're going to go, it's just fruit. They don't know the difference. They don't go, oh, sorry, that's your fruit. Most common netting is in the European fig trees. I think that's what you call them, European, but they are the introduced fig, and they don't know which. They don't go, oh, sorry, that's not the fig I should be eating. So that's definitely a big thing that most people aren't aware. I reckon it's 9 out of 10 people I tell aren't aware that they're pollinators, and that's a real shame because they are so critical for our ecosystem and keeping everything functioning.
And I thank you for mentioning fruit netting, because bats often struggle to adapt within the world that the human being has created, and they do get stuck in fruit netting, and it has been the cause of lots of deaths and severe injury from which some of them can't recover. I mean, particular, tearing of the wing structures and that sort of thing. I mean, these are animals that rely, and it's intrinsic to them to be able to travel, to be able to fly. And when you take that away from them, there's not a lot of hope for the quality of life of that animal beyond its normal structure in that respect. So recently we actually had a great win in that area, we were able to petition the government, and they've committed to ridding from commercial sale all of those types and sizes of fruit netting that are detrimental to flying foxes and bats and microbats. Unfortunately, it doesn't come into effect until July 2021. We'd hope for sooner. But as is the case with government, they often do the right thing, but they move a little bit too slowly for everyone's expectation. But I'm not going to criticise them too harshly, because at least this is a move in the right direction. And you know, we produced some flyers to educate people that we distributed around Geelong and Warrnambool, for instance, on that very subject, that, you know, that they are these amazing pollinators, that they have such a crucial role in our ecosystem, and that this fruit netting is actually stopping all of that happening, and it's actually quite cruel to these animals, and that we ask people to take that netting off and to share their fruit, to share, you know, with these animals. And, you know, I think that's, if we can achieve that, that would be a really good outcome. You know, and I guess that's a great segue for the last question that I have for you, really, in that I'd like you to try and explain to our listeners, to let them know what it is that they can do in their own lives to help protect these animals. Because that's often the question, you know, is they see, people in the community see the solution for all animal problems as being big solution, as part of big government and or even their local council, and not necessarily aware that there are changes that they can make in their own lives that will make a huge difference to the lives of these animals. Can you just go into that for us for a bit?
Yeah, so predominantly over summer, we get an absolute influx, or we can get upwards of 10 to 12 in netting a day. Now, over the COVID work at home, we received so many more calls for bats in netting, and it was really depressing, because yes, we had the ripple effect from the fires, and the animals are struggling due to lack of habitat. So a lot of their food source was wiped out. But not only that, it really sort of showed that there's a lot more that go unreported. Most people are at work, their net's up, they don't check it, and then the animal dies slowly, suffering. You know, it might have been by heat, you know, being strangled by the netting. Mums will chew off their limbs and bits and pieces, which is really, really horrific to see, to get away, because their babies are actually still at the colony. You know, and, you know, what we would really ask people to do is share their fruit. Yes, the netting came in, came in, and it was great. Unfortunately, we've still got a whole nother year of it, and we'll have years to come, because that product's still out there, and a lot of places are actually trying to sell that product to get sell it out, which is unfortunate. So we've got a lot of that in the system still in the community that will take years to leave. You know, there's a lot of areas that probably wouldn't even know about it. So it would be a matter of educating that community in terms of what's safe. You know, a lot of people, we've had a lot of cruelty cases where people have bludgeoned the animals to death, and it's the neighbours that have said something. We've had a few instances of wings cut off, you know, very traumatic things. You know, but nothing worse than having an animal die in a snare or net, or and ideally coming into this after these bushfires, we're going to see a number of starving animals. We'll have animals that are really struggling. So we do ask police to not have the netting at all, ideally, or use fruit socks, so the sleeves that go over a branch.
Yeah.
So, you know, and if for some reason they do get an animal in their net, to always call for help. Don't try and release it. They must come into care. It's critical. Their wings do not repair well if they've been in netting. So there's a great number of them. I think it's about 70% that don't make it back out there, which is very sad.
Look, thanks so much, Tamsyn, for everything you've been talking to us about today, and for answering, you know, my questions and putting that information out there for the community. I think it's so important that we hear these stories, and that we hear of the solutions as well. You know, because that's the point. that there's something that everyone can do at a base level to make the lives of these animals so much better. And with that in mind, if you could leave our listeners with one thought today, what would it be?
Oh, it's kind of two, but yeah,
Go right
it's
ahead.
yeah, it's obviously share the fruit. That is the main thing. Tell your neighbours, tell family. If your grandparents are using netting, make them aware that they are unsafe. To always monitor your nets. You should be checking them every day. And this is backyard fruit tree netting, not your commercial. This is your backyard fruit tree netting. And just wanted to add that in there. There's the second point is that we love bats. There's no reason that people should hate bats. There's nothing that, don't touch them. That's easy. Just don't touch them. And anything else, they do so many things that are very important, and there's no reason for people not to love them. They're very critical and intelligent. And yes, I'm a bit biased, but they are very adorable animals.
Look, I have to admit myself to being quite partial to them. They're I know people shouldn't have favourites with animals, but every now and again you just feel an affinity, and I certainly have that where bats and flying foxes are concerned. They are a favourite of mine, and as I said at the outset, I really love the sky puppies. I think they're amazing.
And that's essentially what they are. They are little puppies with wings. Well, it's not even wings; they're just giant hands. But yeah, they act exactly the same as any baby animal or wild animal. Pet animal.
Yeah. Well, look, thanks so much for your time today.
No worries.
But also for the amazing work that you do for bats, and keep pushing on. It's so much needed out there. Thank you again.
No worries. Thanks, Andy.